Hi, in this lecture we are going to talk about one of the most well-known vulnerabilities of web applications, and that's the SQL injection or SQL injection. Obviously, to have a SQL injection in a web application, it has to talk somehow with a SQL database. If you research a little bit about WordPress, the framework what the person of interest app uses, then you will see that WordPress uses MySQL as a database. So we have the possibility of an injection. But first, let's see what is an SQL injection. For that, let's log on to the target machine. So I go SSH, ether, and then the IP of the machine. And for ether is the password. And we are almost in. Yes. I will actually immediately change to root rights. So if you go to var log MySQL, and there's a file called MySQL all. I configured the database so that it logs all requests, what you can then see here. So let's do tail -f and MySQL log. If you don't know, tail -f is to follow along with a file as it changes. So this is where we stand now. And for instance, if you do a search here, I search for test, go. Then here we see that there were so many requests sent to do only this one search. So I'm assuming that you more or less know the SQL syntax. These are all the queries that were sent. And of course, sometimes you need to use the input from the user in queries. Like for instance, our search for the string test is here. You see it was used in various conditions to get back all the posts which somehow contain the term test in them. So the SQL injection comes from the programming failure of how these queries are built in the application. Because what we are going to try to do is to manipulate queries with our user input to actually get back results which are interested for us as attackers. Let's look at a simple example. I will just open a new tab and just open a file. So let's say if you want to list all users, then you can say select all from VP users. This is the VP users is the table in the WordPress database where the users are stored. So that returns the user list. If you just want to find out something about a specific user, then you say select all from VP users where user login is Vader. So in this case, this query will already return users from the VP users table where the user login equals to the string Vader.
What is a general?
Of course, in the where statement, you could have various conditions which will result exactly in the data what you're wanting. As you can see, these requests, for instance, have many conditions to only get those posts which are interesting for us. And of course, as I already said, at some point you will want to use somehow the user input in your request because, of course, you want to serve your users. So that's the whole reason of the application. So as the search term is used here, or as the username used here, at some point you will also use user input in your request. So the wrong way to create a SQL query is just to concatenate together the user input with the rest of the query without doing any validation or something like that. So for instance, if you say in PHP that your query is this string, select all from VP users where user login is, and then since we will want to use the user input here, we'll just concatenate. Dot is the concatenation in PHP, and then from the get request we take the name parameter and then continue our select statement with and user password is, and again taking it from the request. I left out two quotes, single quotes here. So basically you're creating a new query where the first part is always the same. Then you use the supplied username for the user login and the supplied password for the password. And then this is the request what you're going to send to the database. Now this could be a way to do a login, to use the supplied username and password, and if this query returns anything, then the user exists, then you can let them into your application. Now this is vulnerable. A SQL injection happens when you submit these data. So name is whatever admin, and password, and here comes the trick. We say some text, then apostrophe. With that, this is where we are injecting. So at this point, we filled out this part, which is supposed to be a password. So we are here right now. And instead of letting this apostrophe close our user password string, we are closing it ourselves in the input. And then we continue and say, or 1 equals 1. Comma. So we just copy this request and add it here, and then I will fill out the blanks. So we said that the username was admin and the password was xxx and then apostrophe, and this is where the injection really happens, because we are stepping outside of the variable or the value of that variable which we were supposed to edit, and then we keep writing and we say or 1 equals 1, and then with the colon we are closing the query, and with a double dash we are going to comment out the rest. So the double dash is a comment in MySQL. So basically the rest which stays from the original request, that's the apostrophe and the colon, will be ignored by the database when this query is sent to it. But what can we do with this one? So basically we added another condition, this or 1 equals 1. We use 1 equals 1 because that's true. That's always true, because 1 is always 1. And then we added or, because what happens is that if you have an or true in your where statement, then the whole statement is true. Because if you have options that something is false or true, then because of the or true, it's always going to be true. So what happens is whatever your username and password was, because of this or true, this whole condition will be ignored, and the query will return all users from the database. So that's not an accident why I'm using this example, because that's basically the textbook example of SQL injection. Because if your application is doing the login like this, the checking whether this SQL query returns anything, and if yes, then lets the user in. Then with this or 1 equals 1, you can actually get access to the application without knowing the password, because you didn't put in the real password, you just did the SQL injection. But the injection makes this whole request true. It will return all users from the database, and then the application checks whether this request returned anything, and since it did, it's going to let you in. So as I said, it's the textbook example of SQL injections, but it was actually used a lot in applications for some time. Nowadays, because of that, because it's very well known, you probably are not going to see it anymore. But I like it because it shows perfectly how you could manipulate SQL query with the user input. How you can use SQL injection vulnerability really depends on the application and on the input field. Because sometimes you can extract data, sometimes, like in this case, you can get unauthorized access. So it really depends on how the query is used and what the application does with the requested data. But enough talking, let's see some examples. So go to your browser, have burp running. And I'm sure if you did a manual discovery on this application, you've already noticed that it has something called API service. So if you open it just like that, you get a simple help page, which tells you that this API is created for scripts and other applications to request data from the person of interest database, and that there are some parameters what you can use basically to do your searches. So let's just try it. I will just search for the title solo. And as you can see, we got back JSON. JSON is a data format which is used a lot in web services. So if we go to burp, we can do the rest of the testing in burp because we don't need any interface to do this. So just go to this request. So this is the request what we send, and I will send it to the repeater. And we can repeat it here. So you can see you get all the data. So this is basically all posts which have solo in the title. And you can see that it's 5,800 something bytes long. Now let's try the attack what we just did in the text file. So I'm assuming that we can go back to our MySQL log. And as you can see, this is the query which was sent when we did our search. So it searches for post title, post excerpt, post content, and it checks whether the post title contains the string solo. These percentage signs, that's only for the like, to return all titles which have the substring solo in them. So we are trying to inject here. Let's try to do that. So first we need to finish that like string. For that we need a percentage and then an apostrophe to close it. And then we can start injecting. Plus is, since we are writing in a URL, we need to do URL encoding. And in the URLs, plus means space. So instead of space, I write plus. And then we say or space 1 equals 1 colon or semicolon dash dash to comment out the rest. And I will add another space at the end because otherwise the syntax will not work. One other thing, the percentage is used in URL encoding, and that's why it doesn't always work to use percentage as a literal string. So I want to use the URL encoded version of the percentage. You can find it out if you go to decoder and then you say percentage and encode as URL. Then you will see that it's %25. That's why we cannot use the percent, because each URL encoded character starts with the percent and then a number. So we just take %25, and that's what we are going to use here instead of the single person, right? And now let's send it. Now what you should notice that instead of the 5,000 something bytes, we got 78,000 bytes. And you could see that this post title starts with Boba Fett, which absolutely doesn't have Solo in it. So our injection was probably working. If we go again to the logs, you could see our injection here. It's pretty unfortunate how it looks like. I will make it a little smaller. So you can see here that here it looks like an absolutely fine query, which asks for all titles including Solo, but then adds an or 1 equals 1, so an or true condition, which makes the whole where statement true. So it's going to return all posts from the table. And that's the reason why we got so much data, because we basically got all posts, not only those which contain Solo. Of course, in this specific attack vector, it doesn't really do anything harmful, because you could get the same data in a simple request. So you don't really have to do injection to get this data. You could do it with a normal request. But at least it gives you the chance to understand my forever favorite XKCD comic, Little Bobby Tables. So this was just an easy example. In the following lectures, I will show you how to exploit this vulnerability to actually get unauthorized access to data, to extract data, and how to automate it. Until then, as an exercise, you can check out the source code of the API.php to understand why it's vulnerable. You can find it on the target machine in var www.html.ii, and it's here, api.php. So check it out, and when you're finished, I will see you in the next lecture. Bye.